Anastasia. After a short hiatus while we chase down some urgent work, the podcast is back with a new name and a bigger mission. The Privacy Podcast is now the Agentic Tech Podcast. Why the change? Because privacy was never the destination. It's one of many on-ramps to something more expansive and more forward-looking, agentic technology. Since coining the term in 2022, I've been working with close collaborators to shape it into an ambitious category. The momentum is here. More builders, more capital, and far better ideas for technology that expands, not erodes, human agency. If you're building an identity and data portability, privacy-preserving foundations, agents aligned with human intentions and outcomes, agency-first product design and user experiences that reduce dark patterns, rethinking incentive design, or rebuilding trust in technology, this is your home. To kick off the launch, I brought together a roundtable of founders and investors to set the tone for us. What agentic tech is, what people are building, where capital is flowing, and why it matters now. So thanks everyone for being here. I don't know if even everyone in this chat is aware that there was, prior to what this is, a podcast that Chad and I used to host. I was kind of trying to incubate this agentic tech ecosystem, trying to figure out how to create some conversational tissue. I was also focused on, is there an echo?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey guys, with the echo. Anyway, so I was trying to incubate these ideas with this ecosystem. Really just working so closely with Chad and Zoe, and then like Vivian joined the picture, Ross joined up. So I started also doing these Tethics and Chill series, which are off the record. We bring in experts from outside or, experts from inside our little community of founders and investors. And now it feels like agentic tech or tech for human agency or whatever we want to call it has really grown as a category. And privacy was a feeder or like a gateway drug into what I really wanted to do was advocate for human agency and technology. So now that we are so many, let's start talking about our projects and our products more publicly. So to restart that podcast, which may be a video cast now, which I will call something, maybe Agentic Tech Podcast, maybe Tethics and Chill Podcast, we'll see. I just wanted to get the OGs together and talk about and ask you all, like, how did you guys come to this space? Who brought you, and what do you think agency, user agency, human agency is in technology?
I'm happy to jump in. I would imagine that a lot of us have had a couple turning point moments that were real like light bulbs. And so I'd be curious to hear what those stories are for other people. I think for me, there were kind of two formative experiences that really shaped my understanding of the relationship between tech and humans. One of them is that I worked on the Clinton campaign in 2016, and the idea of foreign interference in elections was not something that anybody had encountered or contemplated before. And regardless of, your own personal assessment about the degree to which there was foreign interference, all of a sudden the specter of that possibility became very real. And so the kind of the relationship between technology and democratic society, I think for me just came into kind of like sharp relief. So that was one experience on the kind of, more negative side. And then the more positive side, a couple years later, I spent some time working in Iraq, and I got to know the first Bitcoin miners in Iraq, who, were pretty resourceful when it came to thinking about financial freedom, given that the Iraqi dinar is not a reliable currency. And I think that felt like the flip side of ways that technology can be super empowering of human agency and contributed a lot to shaping the way that I think about things now. So those were like kind of my two light bulb moments. I don't know if other people here have light bulb moments.
I had a similar one. There was the crypto thing for sure for me. Getting sort of back into crypto 2020-ish and seeing that everyone was confused by the word crypto, thinking, oh, this is secure and private. In fact, it's the opposite. It's secure, but not in the way that people expect. I just saw this like mass confusion that reminded me of all of the sins of the internet that I had contributed to in the past. And, being a gray-haired person here, I can say I was part of Web 1 and Web 2 and really into the Web 2 thing And Web 2 you could kind of characterize as systematized self-doxing. That was kind of what Web 2 was. An exaggeration, of course, but from my perspective, and I was always really excited about the idea of before Twitter existed, we all used iChat or whatever the various instant messenger things were. And there was this thing where you could change your status, and everyone who was friends with you could see your status. And we were all doing things like Apple scripting, so it would just show everything we were doing on our computers at the time. And it was just brought us all together in this way that was really exciting. And I think that's why the Web 2 thing blew up the way it did, is it made the world seem smaller if you could just, show everyone everything you're doing. It has not turned out well. Zoe's reference to 2016 was actually also a catalyst for me, because I thought I have somehow contributed to this disaster that we've created that is social media. And now we're doing it again with crypto. And now we're really at the risk of something majorly bad if we do it the same way with AI.
Brendan, do you have something positive to say? I don't want this to creep into doomerism. Give us hope for the future. Wait, you're muted.
This is the future talking to us and telling us.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay, cool. Awesome. I swear I know how computers work. I could totally segue. Thank you for the tee up, because I was that was my origin. I came out of the crypto space and was really searching for a constructive framing and specifically trying to say, we were really obsessed with decentralization, and I work in peer-to-peer networking, and we're like, well, I don't want to de something. I want to create something. I want to proactively contribute to something. And it also just came from a paper, to be honest, that says a little centralization goes a long way, which sort of just pointed to mathematically decentralization can just be a little bit slower. So what do you actually sort of want to get out of the characteristics of your system? And I started to really just focus on wait a second, stepping back from the capabilities that we work on a lot. What are the benefits? What do you actually get if you could ship this possible new world? And I'm pretty squarely fixated on getting grandma credible exit these days. Can I find ways to have this kind of setup where, yes, a lot of projects and companies and institutions will have my data, but I want to copy to, and I want to make it to be really portable, and I want to use that to simultaneously give competitive advantages to new incumbents, new incomers, people who are making new products that say hey, no, I make this thing that works a lot I don't know, TikTok, but it's completely private. It has all of the signal characteristics. And so you have total control over everything. So you actually should want to use this because you have way more ability to influence who can and can't see you. And it's totally driven throughout the whole system. And to me, that's a great, wonderful, positive, constructive envisioning of the world. And that's what really led me to the idea of user agency. It's just I think people can just use this to build better stuff. And that will just be a great way for those of us who work in digital human rights to sort of translate some of that thinking into competitive advantages. And so that brought me pretty squarely to this idea of user agency in this space, because I just really like the idea of I don't want to de stuff anymore. I want to pro stuff.
Yeah, and similar for me of I think that for me it's all about maximizing human flourishing, and I think that technology is such an amazingly powerful force to do that. By default, it doesn't just happen by default though. A lot of the normal power dynamics of centralization and lack of control lead to outcomes that are not particularly great. And so I think if you treat technology not so much as a fundamentally moral thing, but a thing that can lead to very moral outcomes when deployed properly, you see the importance of these power structures as well. And so I think of it as experiences that have deep resonance. It's something that you like intuitively, and also the more that you think about it and the more you reflect on it, the more that you like it. They feel nourishing. Afterwards, you feel like you did a thing that you're proud of, you want to do again. And so much of technology today has fallen into this state where it feels exactly the opposite. It's all about regret. And afterwards, why did I doom scroll for 3 hours? Or why did I just get stuck in that loop? And I think technology has the potential to be that nourishing force if it leans into our pro-social kind of impact. I think LLMs also, as one of their superpowers, is that they can do qualitative nuance at quantitative scale. And by default, if you throw that into the ways that technology is centralized and the power structures, I think that leads pretty quickly to a thing that's all about engaging and manipulating and even worse. But it could also be used for you to help you align with your aspirations and live the kind of life you want to lead and be in harmony with the world around you. And so I'm just really motivated at this point to be for that application of technology that can lead to human flourishing.
Okay, so I actually want to come back to this topic of being for something versus just against some dominant paradigm or some gravitational systemic well that keeps pulling us in a direction away from where we want to be. But before I do that, I kind of want to center the idea that this isn't a bunch of builders that are building something that doesn't necessarily have the capital or the confidence of the markets behind it. It looks like almost 50% of the people just on this roundtable are actually in VC. So I wanna ask Vivian or Ross, you guys both work for different venture funds. Zoe, you spoke up first, and I think our story is really interesting. Maybe we can get into that later, but I want to ask Ross and Vivian, what drew you guys here, and specifically from the angle of deploying capital?
Yeah, I can go first, and then Ross, you can chime in. When the opportunity came about to support Zoe in helping build out this broad ecosystem of builders, innovators, investors, operators, whatnot, in the broad tent of Tech for Human Agency, I was so excited. Just because I feel like a lot of us are speaking very similar languages in our different camps. And the current paradigm is we're all pretty siloed and we don't necessarily have the opportunity to speak with one another, even if we're thinking about a similar theme across different tech architectures or different types of issues, right? So the concept of building this ecosystem with Anna, Zoe, Ross, just really appealed to me because otherwise there's not really an opportunity for us to coalesce. Earlier this morning, I was organizing a roundtable with folks from the Ante Signal chat, and it was folks that I normally wouldn't have had an opportunity to chat with around the topic of AI child safety. I come from a squarely trusted safety camp, but being able to chat with folks who are also interested in the issue from other sides of the tech paradigm is really appealing to me.
Cool, yeah, and I'll chime in. I think I really got involved or curious to begin with because I was bummed by a lot of the incentives in institutional venture. And for several years before I met Zoe and this crowd and you, Anna, I had been at a big multi-stage fund that was principally concerned with great businesses, but not so much with externalities or societal impacts. And I do think there is a school of thought and a conversation to have about if you're pro market, if you're solving problems for customers, what's so bad about that? But I think there's enough evidence and challenges from the early social platforms and from monopolization in tech and centralized power and all kinds of concerns there that kept me up at night. I think more recently and specifically what really drew me here was seeing the AI agent boom go crazy. So when I was in my last role, I noticed that this notion of AI infrastructure was a very popular roadmap category for software investors. So how can we find and build the developer platforms that make it possible to fulfill this promise of agentic AI, which I know is a big buzzword for us. And I looked at it and I think, agentic is sort of a dual use word or maybe an extended use word, at least for us in this community, because there's all this talk about how do we create bots that take multiple steps of actions with access to sensitive troves of data on behalf of humans. For me, immediately, I started thinking about what are the risks around that and how do I address those risks without being a doomer? I want this to go right, and I think it's really cool and promising. And how is nobody around me having the conversation around how this could potentially go wrong or perhaps not be a one-for-one fulfillment of the philosophical notion of agency?
Yeah, I have this conversation all of the time because I kind of come from economically right of center circles. And to me, it was completely obvious, the lineage from Hayek and Stuart Mill and Adam Smith to just, we need to protect our privacy because it's our most personal property. Data is your digital body. If I can protect my physical body, I should be able to protect my digital body. And I know there's some nuance when it comes to interaction data and stuff in the public domain, or now I'm talking to all of you, so like what parts of that data are just mine, but just starting from the assumption that things that are specifically about me, my thoughts, my history is definitely and inexorably mine. And it's been really interesting to observe that when I talk to people who come from this like libertarian or classical liberal bent, the answer is always, and it gets so polarized really quickly. It's like, oh, so you're one of these decelerationist, like you should believe in innovation. There is no right to privacy in the Constitution. And it's like, yes, but statutorily it's a little bit more nuanced. And, if we just go forward and innovate, it'll just smooth over all of the bumps along the road. And usually the example is, look how much richer and wealthier and more abundant society is. And there's all these times in the past when we thought everything was going to end, but it didn't end. However, we got past the World War, we got past the Great Depression, but those things happened. And the idea of thinking like this is to anticipate where there might be these bumps in the future. Anticipate them so that you can guide and nudge a course that can increase the likelihood of things not going that way. So it's this weird historical amnesia of like, see, we got to a point where we ended the world wars. And it's like, but they still happened. And they can still happen. So can we try to reduce the likelihood of that? So this polarized thinking between decelerationism and accelerationism is really dumb. And Mustafa Suleiman really puts it well. There's this like pessimism aversion in tech circles. And maybe pessimism is the wrong framing, but the pessimism aversion, it's the aversion that's operative. You can't even hold the possibility that there would be externalities. So that's always been really weird to me. I actually noticed that most in the tech circles, I was coming from libertarian economic circles, but then in tech, it was mostly in privacy. And then those guys were definitely the doomer vibe. Everything was suspicious. Everything was just stop that, hide everything. And it never felt right, and I couldn't really figure out why until I articulated the idea of, privacy isn't the point, it's just one of the stepping stones to agency. And so it gave me the opportunity to articulate what things are for and why we're doing this, as opposed to what things we shouldn't do or things to like be afraid of or avoid. And I kind of come back to Zoe on this, because when we started talking, you were thinking about a really different framing for your investment thesis, building out ex ante, which was specifically the anti-things and not the for things. So where are you now in how that investment thesis has evolved? And do you feel like you've been able to articulate the vision for the future as opposed to articulate the vision for what the present shouldn't be?
I'll be very brief because I think Chad has hand up, and if there are a few other people, Alex, Rupert, I think in particular, who wanted to make points. But I will say, in the very first iteration of thinking about the thesis, I used to refer to this space broadly as anti-authoritarian tech, which I never really liked because, number one, anti-authoritarian does not roll off the tongue. And two, it's negative. And three, you kind of have to know what like digital authoritarianism is. So there's a lot of like priors, but I liked that it was very specific. And that it wasn't too like hand wavy. Like freedom tech always felt tough to me because it was sort of like, what does that mean? But I think, through conversations with people like you, Anna, like I think I came to understand that a kind of central component of anti-authoritarian tech is like about human choice and autonomy and agency. So yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to say, on the deceleration versus innovation thing, it's such a silly false dichotomy. And I'm also a VC, so my job is to talk to smart people doing innovative things. And what I've noticed is that some of the most ambitious ideas I've come across are from people like Rupert and Alex and Brendan on this call, who have like seemingly insanely ambitious ideas about upgrading how people interact with computers and the internet and therefore each other. And I know Rupert wanted to say something about how he got into this. Maybe it's not the right way to dovetail into his point, but so be it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the original question was there sort of a moment where agency became a thing, like a thing of importance or like a core value? And I realized that it really goes back to my initial encountering with technology, which is that my parents were both in media. My mum did news reporting. My dad worked in like illustration advertising. And when I was born, they came and formed a home studio. at home in like one of the spare bedrooms of the house. And the upshot of that is like I was just surrounded by technology constantly. I had like all of these computers, I had cameras, I was like, there was an editing suite and there was, Photoshop installed and technology to me kind of was agency. It meant that I could, I was an only child. It meant that I could go into this world, this room, which was basically like my workshop for creating stuff and building anything. And like, when I was 8, I was making little videos and cutting them together and did my first HTML website and distributed on a CD-ROM. All of that stuff was like incredibly empowering to me. And yet also, as I grew up, I also realized how disempowering it was to a lot of people, despite being a more and more important part of their lives. I think seeing the complexity, these computers are these general purpose devices that get more and more complex as the more and more things that we have to sort of stuff in there with more menus and more hidden settings. And they've reached a point now where I think it's kind of untenable, the complexity. And, just I've got a kid going through preschool and the amount of portals and different passwords and settings and like, it kind of makes you go insane a little bit. We've created this like concoction of a world, which is very complicated and disempowering for people. And, I'm sure many people here in this chat as well have been tech support for various people in their lives, struggling with technology, despite being incredibly capable in other areas of their lives. So as I started the work I'm doing now, which is around thinking about a new kind of operating system, the word agency started to land as a core value. And I realized that was definitely part of what attracted me to technology in the first place, and also part of what really pains me to see people lose when they're interacting with technology. So I really hate that people feel disempowered and a lack of agency. And I also think thinking about social media, you can see the mismatch in incentives where computers are actively working against actual desires and hacking their brains to what is not their agency, but is what their brain is seeking out as a very negative pathway that we're trading right now. So, which can get a lot worse. And the positive upshot, Anastasia, is that I think it can get a lot better. Part of what excites me about machine learning from the beginning has been the ability for a computer to meet the user halfway, to understand vagueness, intent, all of these like very fluffy things that computers have up until now been completely incapable of helping with, that I believe can untangle some of the thing we've created and make computing generally an agency booster for everybody, not just like nerds like me who grew up in a room full of 7 computers. And I think that's kind of where I'm at. And it definitely runs deep, and I think it's like super important. And it's a great framing as well that I think this group has helped bring out and tease out with a lot more fidelity.
Yeah, this idea of vagueness and intent and an AI that works with you to really understand where you're at and what you need is really powerful. And it's also important to figure out who stores that, who owns those ideas about you, who owns those little fragments of your digital body. And a lot of us were also working together during the last sort of big crypto cycle, because decentralization was suddenly, this is the panacea and the exact way to serve people. And it was like the new privacy, like, let's go private. Everything has to be private. And then that didn't quite get us anywhere. And then, okay, let's just centralize everything. That's going to solve everything, and everything will be sovereign and people will have options. And that also didn't get us anywhere. And I think all of these things they weren't wrong, but they were like these paths. I think, Alex, you articulate this really well, this idea of like, you have a moon that you're aiming for, but if you try to shoot for the moon all the way from the earth with like a little arrow that you just sharpened, you'll probably will miss. But if you kind of shoot for stepping stones along the way, I don't know what stepping stones to the moon would be, so my analogy, and perhaps your analogy, fails here, but the idea is you have a goal in sight, but you're not actually trying to hit the goal, you're trying to get closer to it. And so all these things like slowly got us to a place where I think now, and that moon is, human agency. So decentralization was almost like this. It was neutral. It didn't have a purpose. It didn't articulate a vision. And decentralization can be good or bad depending on what it actually accomplishes in the end for the user.
It's also, decentralization is also extremely expensive, like in terms of coordination costs. Yep. And so it is a really useful way to make it so there's not one central point that has arbitrary power, and that leverage creates power corrupts. So it's good for diffusing that, but if you use it all over the place for all these other things, like it's kind of is extra thing that is missing the point of it's helping us towards human agency and flourishing as opposed to just an end in and of itself.
And now that we have Kim back, she was kind of articulating this point before she lost the internet connection. So Kim, welcome back. I want to actually ask you this question because you've been in this identity space, which is really just a technical term for fragments of the digital body, and where are they stored, who owns them, and who has access control over them, and who gets to decide who gets to see them, basically. What are your kind of do you have ideas on how to architect, especially in an age of AI where we do want assistants that know a lot about our intents and where we're going and what we're trying to accomplish, but also that centralization of data makes us very fragile, very vulnerable to manipulation, and in a very real way reifies some of the worst excesses of the platform social media era.
Well, I think to your point about, I'll just say stepping points to the moon, even if we don't know what they are. We have built a lot, we've learned a lot, and we've built a lot of the tools, technology, sort of cryptographic methods to achieve, things that maybe they didn't take off as we intended to with earlier efforts, when we framed it as decentralization or privacy, but I think can be really well used now. And I think this ties to Chad's point. I think you're hinting at the idea that we have an idea for a moment for pretty rapid disruption right now. Now that experiences of how people interact with the web are being completely rewritten. And I think, there's a lot of the different elements that we can pull together in ways that achieve these goals that we were going after all along, and to do it at even a scale that we didn't even plan for before.
Yeah, and there's actually a point where we can make it all better from just like a usage perspective. Like, there are a lot of things that smart people have been wanting to do with the internet, but we've been too baked in for a long time, and I think that's part of where the convergence comes from. It's like, everything being key-based, for example, makes sense in this new world because you've got a whole new slew of identities of these agent things that are going to exist, and you also have a whole bunch of slop that's being generated and making the internet useless. So there's a moment where we can remove usernames and passwords, which is just a stupid legacy thing that happens sort of by accident, and then eventually for economic incentive reasons by the big hyperscalers. Totally agree with you.
That point, by the way, that hyperscale, like, this emerges fundamentally due to the laws of physics that we've been using to handle data's natural kind of virality. It leads to hyperscale solutions that have all this data. As a user, when you're using a particular service and your data starts accumulating there, it gets harder and harder to leave, which means the competition effectively for it goes down, which means this sort of the push for it to be a better and better product. Then as it searches for larger and larger audiences, it goes after the people who have the least engagement with the thing, and it dumbs down the product to work for them. So you end up getting with this maximally used, minimally liked product. And I think also hyperscaling is what leads to this focus on engagement maxing. So you want to make a product that the users like, and the thing that they like is not necessarily what they want to want, but what they want. And so, like, if you had a choice between 3 different chatbots, and one of them is just somewhat sycophantic, and the other ones are like really direct and blunt, people just naturally gravitate toward the one that doesn't make them feel so bad in the short term. Like, that's a fundamental, like, duh, obviously. And so there's a natural pull. Like, even when OpenAI did the ChatGPT 5, there was like a revolt from the users. It was not sycophantic enough, and they felt like it had killed their best friend and stuff. And so it's kind of like this inevitable gravitational pull. If you're doing hyperscaling that you want to give, that you're going to pull towards sycophancy, you're going to pull towards engagement maxing, as opposed to that wholesome, nourishing stuff that people really, really want.
Which also comes down to incentives of monetization, right, as well, because, if you're going for an ad model, it doesn't matter whether the user wants it or just wants it. You just want them on for as long as possible into whatever platform or service you're providing. And so I wonder whether that question of agency also dovetails into this question of, like, what are agency aligned laws of physics, to put your term, Alex, which I think is great. It's like, how do you structure the laws of physics in order to promote that thing and have it as an emergent property of a system rather than something that we all need to just do because we feel really good about it?
Yeah, I think putting my investor hat on in this conversation, I keep thinking about the cloud multiple heyday of 2021 and the run up to that. And there was this big sort of growth at all costs push that was ultimately not sustainable. And I think while investors, rightfully were challenging the business model impact of having some sort of an unsustainable push and cash burn and reshifting in favor of profitability, I also think that there are some concerns, or there clearly were, around what growth at all costs looks like for data usage, for building and pushing algorithms that were training on data without people's consent, or creating partnerships and licenses that were unintelligible to the average user and able to be understood and parsed through. And so I think that was quite concerning. And I also think a pivot to today, recently there's all this talk in the AI developer era around taste. And I think it's important. I think taste is really like a gateway into like quality and value. And then the cool thing about this ecosystem and this community that we're a part of is that I see it as a steering toward higher quality software to better outcomes for users, to better bargains. It's not anti-growth. It's growing in the right direction with the right agreements.
Yeah, and I think it's important. Maybe this will be a contrarian view. I'm interested to see what people think. But I really like the vitamin versus painkiller dichotomy presented. Like, are you giving somebody? And I think one of the failure modes of groups like ours can sometimes be that we fall really into vitamins, right? Where it's like, hey, we really want to give people stuff. And like, Ross, to build on what you were just saying about this idea of like not being anti-growth, like when we have sycophantic, personalities that are now engaging with us really heavily, can we? I think it's kind of one of the core challenges that I try to sort of step up to the plate of nowadays in this agentic sort of modality of like, okay, cool, that's what people want. Like, how do we actually position our work in a way that acknowledges that desire and finds a way to sort of like wrestle with it directly and present something that sort of can slide the vitamins in with the painkillers, which is, I'm butchering the metaphor.
The thing I would add is like, I think there are vitamins and painkillers, and I also think there's junk food. And I think so much of the way that technology has been built in recent years has been around the junk food model. It's around obviously engagement maximization, but also around fulfilling short-term desire as opposed to like true, intentional needs and desires of an individual. And I think if all of us were to, step back and think about how we want to spend our time or how we want to engage on the internet, we would choose something healthier than junk food. And so I think in many ways it's like incumbent upon people building companies and building products to think about, like what is like the healthy food equivalent that actually, if we were able to make a choice in a thoughtful way, is what we would all opt into, rather than delivering junk food just because it's addictive.
That's why it's like resonant things that you like in the moment. It shouldn't be like a thing you gotta go, ew, you gotta do it.
Yeah.
You gotta like doing it, and the more you use it, the more you like it. I would also point out, by the way, I think chatbots are just the first form factor for LLMs, and they're like the obvious, easy one, and it frames, the mental model is AI as human, as a person that I can talk to. And this is where some of the oddities come in around like this infinitely sycophantic, like this person who acts like a friend but will always support you in whatever you do no matter what, which is not what real friendship is like. And so I think like LLMs, AI as software, and one of the types of software is it can spin up a chatbot for you to talk to at various points, I think is a healthier way of thinking than like everything should be this one human-like thing that you're interacting with that has this other mental model. Like, it just feels like it's that pulls us partially towards sycophancy. And one of the ways of containing it is AI as software that you can spin up. Sure, you can spin up a sycophantic bot, you can spin up a challenging bot, you can spin up whatever you want, but it doesn't feel like you're talking to the thing.
Chad!
Hey guys! I was getting jealous. I was like, wow, I'm really missing out on something here.
Hey, Chad, welcome.
Hello. Yeah, wow, the cold call, I wasn't expecting it. Yeah, I guess like one moment in time where I was like, oh wow, these like the incentives on these platforms are really effed up was when I was at YouTube. I was working on the creator side of the business, so like working on helping creators like make money and build an audience on the platform. And I was based out of the UK, working mainly on emerging markets. And there was a time when a lot of the big advertisers pulled out of YouTube because their ads were getting shown on terrorist content. And it was called the ad apocalypse. And so Unilever pulled out and a bunch of other big brands pulled out. And so a lot of creators were very badly impacted by that. And I was on the front lines kind of working with a lot of creators. And yeah, that was for me sort of a time when like platforms aligning their interests with advertisers didn't work very well, and the people that were impacted were the lifeblood of YouTube, the creators that are the reason that YouTube is what it is. And so yeah, I kind of started to kind of become very interested in the incentives of these platforms and how we might align incentives better with the individuals that are the main stakeholders on many of these platforms. So that's one moment that comes to mind.
So yeah, incentives are a really difficult thing to do in technology because the individual user doesn't have any bargaining power really, right? And attempts to try to price data at the individual user level also don't work. So how do you actually bake incentives into the product design? Do you guys think about this actively, or sometimes, or only at like the once in a while strategy level, or is it at the CLE level you're always thinking about it?
All the time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's the critical question, right? And I do think that users have some degree of control. It's just very coarse grained. You can switch to a different app, right? And that's the way that we see the most agency expression, I think, right now. And I think I like to trace that as the origins of user agency. Like I sort of think about this as like a pattern that has existed historically. And there are some things that I would call out as virtuous, and I'd welcome pushback on this. But to me, the idea that an app like Signal can eke out a million strong audience in a very saturated market, where like the reaction game on Signal is not great. The like subroom creation features on Signal are not perfect, but like there's a bunch of us when asked, hey, you're my smart friend who knows technology. What app should I use for chatting? A lot of us will say something like Signal, right? And why will we say that? And we'll say, well, because it has these characteristics that we've thought about very deeply, and we're trying to sort of like make sure that you have that as somebody who's engaging with it. And so I think that kind of sets up a couple of the themes of advancing an agentic agenda, where it's like, we have a very specific place in the stack of recommendation and in these social networks that we can play. I don't love this metaphor, but it's kind of similar to the way that like a lawyer reps you in court. Like they kind of advocate for your digital rights, and they think about this carefully, and they manage some of that complexity on your behalf. And then they just ask you like, hey, what do I use? And you say Signal. Now, can we break that down a little bit and have a more fine-grained set of tools for recommending like, yeah. It shouldn't be just like configuration help, but maybe it's ideally sort of like, oh, not only can you use Signal, you can switch back and forth dynamically. And now you can have Signal connected to something else, and you can wire this up to this agent that you should really trust because it runs locally and it's a totally different approach. Or like, we can do this cross-platform Android iOS stuff because this team has done this, right? That's the kind of thing that I think helps turn up our capacity to sort of eke this out and get some of these really big challenges, because honestly, yeah, we are competing with like really well understood paradigms. Like they're just really good. They're really solid. They scale well. And this is like not simple work, but I think those are the places where I see some wins.
One of the problems with this like voting with your feet idea is network effects. And it could be that network effects is one of the problems, is the problem for all of us. I don't know. No, I'm thinking about like, I use Facebook. I'm somewhat ashamed to say, because Facebook is the LinkedIn for avant-garde jazz musicians. And I'm an avant-garde jazz musician, or just jazz musicians in general. They're all there. My heroes are recommended to me as friends, and I hit friend and they say, yes, I will be your friend because no one else wants to be my friend on this platform. But what do I do? Like, how do I get, as an independent artist or label owner, in the music case, how do I get this music out? I can't say, well, I'm going to this new thing. Like there's actually a guy building something called Subvert, which If you have an interest, you should go look it up. It's a Bandcamp replacement. It's like an artist co-op. Very cool project. Probably someone who should be in this group, actually. I want him to succeed, but I can't just move to Subvert now because no one's looking at it yet. So, there's this whole chicken and egg problem, which is why a bunch of us, I think it's no coincidence that a bunch of us have met in this little sub-community via crypto, not because we wanted to trade meme coins or buy NFTs, but because we wanted to solve coordination problems and we wanted to be able to program incentives into protocols, into applications in a way that humans could then at least trust another human to evaluate and show them that it's okay. So that's why I'm in crypto, and it's also a problem that I'm hoping we can solve at scale. I would love to have opinions by someone else smarter than me on this topic, and I know you're here.
Actually, I wanted to point out that it's actually really hard to exit in order to, like, if you feel that your incentives are not being prioritized or reflected well by the platform or the technology you're using, the cost of exit is astronomical. You basically, you don't get the utility that you need, Chad, as you were saying. All of the fellow jazz musicians you want to connect with happen to be on a platform that doesn't reflect your agency, your highest view of yourself. And so this cost of exit is really onerous. And I'm not sure what, Jad, I think you were building something that's like the memory layer for the internet. Is this foundational to solving this problem where the context remains regardless of where that context manifests as a user experience or as a service?
Yeah, I think to address the earlier points, I think privacy and control typically shouldn't be thought of as a value prop. It should be more so the outcome of using a product or an experience. Otherwise, you end up with people like us being the only users. And so that's been sort of a guiding principle for us, is how do we build something that just has inherent utility or is just generally fun for people to use. And by the way, as an outcome of that, your stuff is under your control, and you have this user-controlled memory that you can take with you and services can query. And that's kind of been the thing that we've been primarily focused on. So depending on which perspective you're looking at what we're building with, some people perceive us as a consumer company. Some people perceive us as a privacy control infra type company. And it depends how you're viewing us. Ross knows quite a bit about how we've been thinking about things too. But yeah, I think the underlying principle for us is privacy and control as an outcome, not as a value prop, has been sort of a guiding principle.
The next episode is not going to be a roundtable. I think I'll actually dive deeper into the product level or the protocol layer or the policy level and start, picking apart some of the idea primitives behind human agency and technology. Leading into that, any parting thoughts for new audiences that are just coming into this and they've never even heard of agentic tech or human agency, or that they should exert more options and consent over their digital experiences? Nodding heads.
I think this is a spicy take to end on, but knowing that this is a big tent movement that is both pro-social and pro-market, one of the core defining challenges we have, but exciting problems to solve, is that this isn't ESG. It's not squarely responsible AI or something necessarily politicized. And it's good for humanity, and it's good for commercial traction and market potential, is what I'm getting at. And so it's a tough nut to crack, because we want to do right by users. We want to be transparent. I'm confident that this group is doing that, and we're also on the heels of several movements in corporate governance that kind of flopped, and so we're here to do better on that.
That's great.
I think my takeaway is from. Go ahead, Kim.
Okay, well, to build on what Ross was saying, I guess I'll add, it's rare that we have a moment like this where it's so ripe for disruption. I think we're used to assuming things have to be trade-offs or choices that don't necessarily have to be the case. So in terms of products, services, offerings that can be aligned with human values and offer new opportunities, I think that what we're talking about, especially with agentic AI, new modes of interaction, we can build these things that offer entirely new opportunities. So, sorts of services where you don't necessarily have to hoard all the data before some, rapidly personalized or dramatically personalized offerings are possible. Also things like, rather than dark patterns of using your behavior and manipulating you, maybe there are things that nudge you to be more reflective or lead to more positive interactions. So I think if you are interested in these topics, this is the perfect time to get involved, because it's such a sort of moment for disruption.
I was just going to say my two takeaways here is that there's still some incentive thing to be worked out. Like what does the atlas of incentives look like for building something that is more aligned with human agency? I went and got a loaf of bread from the shops today. I felt like it was kind of a mutual win-win. I got a loaf of bread. I paid $8. Mind you, it was a pretty good loaf of bread, but there's no extra thing muddying the water there. I feel like that incentive thing that we raised here is something interesting to think further about. And also to some extent as well, the metaphor point that was brought up by Alex with chatbots, one metaphor, like a skeuomorphism, like chatting with a person, brings up things that come along with that metaphor, all of this baggage that tends to push products in certain directions. I think a similar thing happened with the cloud, that we all kind of just like gave our files to the cloud. We got rid of this file metaphor and we lost something really important in that process, which is that now all of our stuff doesn't belong to us anymore. And that comes with benefits, but that metaphor also traps a lot of really important things that take away from our agency. So I think thinking creatively about metaphors is also part of that work that needs to be done.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple of people that probably will be on future episodes that are thinking specifically about this idea of graduating philosopher builders. So people that aren't just thinking about the building the product and making sure that it or increasing the likelihood that it's successful and it finds its customer base, but that there's a philosophy, a set of values driving it, which is largely absent from technologists, not because technologists are nefarious, mean, and terrible people who want to accumulate power and wealth, but because there's no exposure to these ideas when you're studying computer science. And once you kind of see these ideas, they start to exert their own gravitational pull on you, besides the more prominent pull of like the product and the market needs to fit together. I've really enjoyed this conversation and I've been laughing a lot. And for audiences, the reason I've been laughing a lot is because we're not actually just a bunch of nerds that talk about technology and how it needs to do better, but because we have there's a fireside chat going on here. And I mean fire. We're going off. And so it's a pretty fun group to participate in and join. So if this is something that like rankle your cankles and you want to get into agentic tech and want to do something for the future of human dignity in our kind of joint evolution with technology, hit up literally any one of us. We're funny as well as nerdy. Yeah, I don't know what rankles your cankles means. I'm being asked in the fireside chat what that means, but I like how it rolls off the tongue. So it has its own flavor, doesn't it? Right? There's context.
I'm using
and
it.
That's all you need.
Flavor is a disturbing word to use in this.
I just proved my point, though. Context is very often all you need to make your point. All right, guys. On to the next episode. Have fun building. Stay
Everyone,
tethical.